Welcome to the Homegrown podcast, a place where we share the truth about food and farming from our kitchen to yours. I'm your host, Liz Hazelmeyer, along with my husband, Joey.
Good morning.
And together we hope to educate, inspire, and equip you in your pursuit of true nourishment. Today's guest is Dr. Joel Gator, a board-certified pediatrician in Los Angeles, California, who specializes in parenting, wellness, and integrative medicine. He is the author of Parenting at Your Child's Pace, the Integrative Pediatrician's Guide to the First 3 Years. Dr. Joel, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me on. I'm excited to chat.
We're so excited to chat. Something we've not yet honed in on this show is those first 3 years. And I've heard so many different statistics about brain development and sleep establishment and nourishment. And so I'd love for you to start out by explaining the importance of those first early years in childhood, and then we'll dive in from there.
Yeah, I think what for me as a pediatrician has been so frustrating is that medicine and I think parenting has become so compartmentalized in terms of different years, focusing on things as it comes up as we're getting older, like we get sick and then we're worried about it at that point. But the reality is that everything in terms of our health and wellness starts from day one, even before that, right? Even when we're pregnant, all the things that we're doing matter. And certainly as a baby is developing, all of those years are the formative years. We have, a vast majority of our brain development in the first few years. We're learning about the world. We're learning about our relationships. We're gaining attachment. All of these things make a huge difference. And I think we're just at the beginning of scratching the surface to understand just what that means. But we certainly know from the research and studies that have been done over decades that our attachment in the first few years matters so much to how we view the world, how we perceive the world, our mental health as we get older. So yeah, I think it's extraordinarily important. And that's why I chose to even write a book on the first few years, because I wanted to talk to parents and get to parents before issues come up. And I think that these days it seems like we're getting to things way too late. And that's why we're seeing a chronic disease epidemic.
Yeah. What are some of the mistakes that parents are making early on that if we can correct those, we don't have to walk in with a 5, 6, 7-year-old child who's facing maybe a diagnosis or a chronic illness?
To me, I think the biggest overall issue is that we're not recognizing that every little decision that we make has a huge impact in the long term. We don't necessarily focus on our health until it's too late or until we're exposed to something or something pops up where we need to really think about it. But the reality of where we are today is that 50% of kids or so have a chronic disease. So that means if you have 2 kids, one potentially is going to have a chronic disease. And as a parent, as a pediatrician, as a health wellness advocate, that's really frustrating to me. And it's something that we have to get ahead of. And so to me, the big mistake that we're making is not thinking about all those little decisions that we're making in a lens of health and making decisions from that standpoint, like the food that we choose, the toxins that are in our home, all of the little things that we're doing. It matters, it adds up. And we just don't, I think in that way. So that to me is really where the problem begins. And I think there's a lot that we can do that is not that complicated, kind of simple things that we can do on every day that can make a big difference.
Mm-hmm. But do you think that there is just an abundance of information out there, which is just confusing parents potentially? Because I think if you tell them, hey, every little thing you do matters, their anxiety is initially going to flare up, right? And they're going to be like, but Dr. Joel, I'm trying so hard. I'm doing all these things. How can we parse through that information and really dial into the things that actually matter?
Yeah, great question. Because that to me is a really big concern. The stress level for parenting is higher than ever. I mean, that's one of the big, foundational principles of the book is trying to decrease stress of parents because it can be extremely overwhelming, but it doesn't need to be. I think the reality is we just need to be mindful that our decisions matter and focus on the basic foundations, the things that we know truly lead to health, like our food, diet, exercise, sleep, stress. Like these are the things that really truly matter. And you don't need to do everything. You don't need to have a PhD, but you can read food labels. You can read the label on everything that you purchase. You can start to learn about some of the ingredients on things. You don't have to do everything. You don't have to move to the mountains, right? And build a farm. Some people do. I have friends that have moved, but you don't need to do that. In modern society, we can just start to be mindful of our decisions, and it does snowball over time, and the little decisions make a big difference. So to me, I just remind parents, just start wherever you're at. It doesn't have to be more expensive, doesn't have to be stressful doesn't have to be everything. Just begin somewhere. Just be like, all right, I want my kids to be healthy. So when I purchase something, I'm going to read the labels. If there are 2 different bags of chips, I'm going to try to buy the bag of chips with the ingredients that I know instead of the long chemically words. I'm going to start to learn a little bit about what causes a healthy child versus what is an ingredient that might not be the best for them, and then just try to avoid some of those things when I'm making purchases. And it does seem to be that once you get into that mindset, you start to learn a little bit more, you start to be a little bit more active in your decision making, and then that is going to send us down a path of health and wellness, and it's going to teach our kids what to be thinking about as well, which is really the goal at the end of the day.
Yeah, I love that. Let's dive into the food piece because you've mentioned that a few times. How, even as early as maybe food during pregnancy, but maybe let's just start with first foods for baby. This is something that standard pediatrician recommendation might still be cereal, but we all kind of in the real food space, we're like, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Talk to us about how we can set our kids up for success with food early on.
Yeah. So great point there. So it used to be, when we were all growing up, it was like rice cereal was kind of the first food that everybody
Yeah.
did. But now we're concerned. There's a lot of concerns around like arsenic in rice and other chemicals. And so that has kind of moved away, which I think makes sense. To be, you just start with real food. You start with roots or vegetables, avocado, banana. Again, it doesn't have, in my opinion, it doesn't have to be complicated. I think we're overcomplicating things. What we're not doing is preparing food enough ourselves. And that really is the main focus point for me, for parents, of what they can do to make the biggest difference. Just go and get real food, things that you actually know what they are, prepare it yourself as much as you can, and that's going to get you a long way. Anything that's pre-prepared has, for the most part, chemicals and preservatives, and so those are chemicals and preservatives that your kid is being exposed to. Now, can they eat some of those things and still be healthy? Sure, but it just adds up over time. And a great research study that I always like to talk about for kids and food, there was this great study out of Harvard where they were looking at soup, and they gave the participants 5 days of canned soup and then 5 days of homemade soup. And they were looking at BPA levels in the urine because the inside of the cans have BPA in them. And after the 5 days of doing the canned soup versus the 5 days of doing homemade soup, the difference was 1,000% BPA in the urine. And that to me is just such a staggering, great study that shows, like, look at the difference that we can make by just 5 days of preparing something yourself. That's one chemical, one thing that you're exposed to in just 5 days. But what a huge difference between those two levels. And that to me is why we're getting to this place where kids are so sick, because we're just adding these things together. We're not focused on the little things, and we don't think that it makes a difference. But if you have 1,000% less of BPA and 1,000% less of forever chemicals and 1,000% less of all of these different things, then that matters over 5 or 10 years. So yeah, I think it makes a difference, and it's just those small little changes. But it's not, it doesn't have to be complicated. It's just, let's get more real food. Let's cook a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something I've said a few times on here is like, as we've had more kids, I've just avoided the baby aisle completely. I don't buy any of the packaged like baby food or the puffs or whatever. And, pushback I get is like, well, it's just so convenient. You can just whip them out and just put them on the high chair. And I'm just like, well, banana is like pretty convenient. I just put it in the bag and then I open it up and they can eat it. So opting for real whole foods doesn't have to mean you are now a slave to your kitchen. It just means you're changing your perspective on the things you might be packing with you or serving to your kids in your home. I love that. Soup is such a simple thing. Maybe takes 10 minutes to prepare, but simmers all day. And look at the benefit.
Right.
You're avoiding
Can I say, because I think that's so important, because that is the big piece, right? I mean, the two things that I always hear are convenience and cost. But when you're talking about convenience, yes, I agree. It's definitely more convenient to go to a store and buy something that's packaged. But what do you lose, right? What you lose for convenience, what you lose for mass production is health. And that's what's happened over the last 50 years or 100 years, where we have created products through big companies that are easier and faster and cheaper. And that can be a good thing. I understand that. But if that's what you're doing consistently, then you're losing something for that convenience. And what you're losing is the benefits of the health that you're getting from real food that's local, that's full of nutrients, and you're gaining more toxins. Because how can something sit in a store and not go bad, right? We all know, if you've been to a farm or maybe have a garden and you pick something off, like let's say you pick a berry out of your home garden, how long does it last? Like 2, 3, maybe 4 or 5 days at most. But something in a store is not 2 or 3 days old, right? It's picked somewhere, shipped across the country or from another country, sits in the store for a couple days, then you buy it, then you eat it. So there's something in there. They've done something to keep it from going bad for the most part, or it's touching something with chemicals or whatever it is. So again, it's not that you should feel shame or feel scared that we're eating something here or there. But if this is what you're doing all of the time, then the outcomes speak for themselves. 50% of kids have a chronic disease. If you're okay with that, that's fine. But my job as, I think, a pediatrician and a parent is to tell people like it is. It's not to sugarcoat it. It's not to scare people. But we are at a place where kids and adults are sicker than ever. Life expectancy is going down. And if we want a different outcome, we have to do things differently. And so at some point, we have to say, yes, this is more convenient, but it's not healthy. And I want my kids to be healthy. So I'm going to figure out a way to find the time to make more food. I'm going to find a way to either spend the money on food or try to find things that are equivalent price, within my means, to be the healthiest that we can be as a family. It's on us. We have to do it ourselves as parents. No one's going to do it for us.
Mm-hmm.
This study from Harvard, I hate to go backtrack here, but I'm very fascinated by the results they found in 5 days of eating. And I don't know the actual gravity of 1,000 parts per, I don't know, like 1,000% more BPA. I don't know like what that impact is. Was there any additional results or study or information given on what symptoms we might find as a result of having that high level of BPA in our system?
I don't think so. I think it was a very short-term study, so it's really hard to make assumptions based on that. It really just showing the increased levels in urine. So it really depends on how much actually stays in the body, how much comes out, how much you're detoxifying. I think that makes a huge difference on a person-to-person level. And I don't, from what I saw in the article, they don't make those kind of conclusions because they really can't with that kind of study. It was really small scale. But to me, I think it's just a really great study just to make people realize how much of a difference it is on one chemical at one time, just based on a few days. Now, does that clinically affect you? Probably not, right? Probably not over 5 days. But to me, would it affect you if you did that over 5 years or 10 years? Yeah, probably. And would it affect you against all the other chemicals that you're exposed to? If everything is 1,000% higher versus 1,000% lower, is that going to make a difference for your health? Of course it will, right? I think that to me is just really common sense in that our bodies are amazing and they can handle most things, most toxins, but we're very clearly at a point where our bodies no longer can handle the toxic load that we're being exposed to. And that's why we're seeing more and more kids get sick that were never sick before. If you look at the data from just decades ago, maybe 5-10% of kids had a chronic disease. Now it's 50%. If you look at the mental health crisis, 18 years old, 50% of teens have a mental health diagnosis. A third of all teen girls are thinking about suicide. A fourth have created a plan. 1 in 10 have tried. These things are astronomically bad numbers. I mean, let's look at diabetes, right? Diabetes wasn't really existent in kids 50 years ago. I was doing a talk on diabetes, trying to look up the statistics on what it was a few years ago, maybe 20, 30 years ago. And you couldn't even find data on kids with diabetes. It almost wasn't existent. It was called adult onset diabetes, type 2 diabetes, right? And now the average age for diabetes is 13 onset. And 1/3 of all kids has diabetes or pre-diabetes. Like, these are numbers that are so scary over a change of just a few years, to the point where you can't even find data on some of these things just a few years ago. So, there's something that we're doing that we need to change, probably many things. But to me, at least as a doctor, it's like, okay, it's time to be mindful. We're doing something wrong. Let's course correct, because we used to die when we were 40, right? So there was a lot of things that we're doing better, right? It's not like we're doing everything bad. We got much better at infectious disease. We have better sanitation. We have better safety standards. Like, there's a lot that we do really well, but we traded dying at 40 and infectious disease causes for chronic disease because we are living longer. And so now this change has happened so rapidly over the last few decades that's encouraging, because it means there's a lot that we can do to change our environment back. And we can course correct to being a little bit healthier again, but it's a middle ground. It's a balance. And I feel like we're so out of balance right now because of what you said. We're so focused on convenience, and we're marketed to that. It's time that we say, okay, well, our health is also important, and so therefore we need to prioritize that too.
Mm-hmm.
Humanity also has a way of doubling down on things that work until they don't, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you just said it yourself. We used to live till we were 40, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there were some things that we figured out as humans that started to work really well.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of doubled down on those things, right? A
Right.
lot of, hey, there's an issue, so we treat that thing. And we've discovered a lot of advancements in medicine and things like penicillin, things that in really old times to have now, it's like, it's crazy, right?
Mm-hmm.
The impact that those sorts of antibiotics can potentially have on a person that's dealing with a major challenge. Whereas, kind of leaning into those and doubling down, there's other challenges as we continue our kind of pursuit of health, right? That we're learning, which is interesting to me for sure.
And I think one of the things to remember is that study where the BPA was found in the urine. So BPA is, I assume, a transient chemical, so your body can flush it out. But that's one example of there are chemicals that aren't transient that get stuck in your systems, that get in your tissues, right? And so it's really hard to have those show up on any sort of measurable metric, because what are you going to do? You have to do a challenge to do a urine test, or you have to do a blood draw, or you have to do a tissue sample. So BPA, you might be like, oh, well, at least they're peeing it out. Yeah, that's great. But what about the PFAS, that are in every paper and plastic packaged item or for your takeout? Okay. We have a really hard time measuring that. What about like the phthalates and the parabens, all these things that we are maybe able to detox until we can't. And then how do you know that you're, where your detoxification level is? Like, are your kids regularly going to the bathroom? I ask my kids often, like, hey, have you pooped recently? Because like, we got to make sure things are flowing, because I do know, even though we do eat really well in our house, you can't avoid some of this stuff. I mean, we still go out to eat. We still go to friends' houses where we're eating food, and so it could be easy to say, oh, there's just chemicals everywhere. I kind of give up, toss my hands up. But I think if you instead say, you know what, there are some things that I can control and also lean on my body's ability to, like you said, we're beautifully designed to detoxify some of this stuff, not all of it, but some of it. And just having that mental picture of 5 days increase of 1,000%. I think it was percentage, right? Of the BPA is just a good little reminder to pull back in your brain the next time it's tempting to pull the can of soup off the shelf. I'll be honest. I'm like, let's do a quick lunch, and it never tastes as good. So that's just a good reminder.
No, it's what you said is so perfect, because that's exactly the way that I think. We're not going to stop chemicals, right? Like that's not the reality. I mean, I guess if you want to go into politics or whatever and go fight on Capitol Hill, sure, you could do that. Sure. But the reality is, there's chemicals in the air, there are chemicals in our water, there are chemicals everywhere. So we're not going to get rid of everything, but we have a lot of control over the things that we bring into our home, the things that we purchase, what we're doing. And so if you can control most of those things and just, again, be mindful of the chemicals and toxins, start to learn about them, start to make choices that are the best possible choices that to make at that time, then I think that will get most people most of the way, because we, not so long ago, were fairly healthy, didn't have a lot of these chronic diseases because we weren't eating a lot of this mass-produced food. We weren't exposed to as many chemicals. So our body can handle a lot. And that's great. I mean, we're very lucky in that sense that we can handle a lot. And from what I have seen, the individuals that are more mindful are generally healthier, don't have as many chronic diseases, and it makes a big difference. I mean, in my current practice, people are in general way healthier than my former practice when I was working in the hospital. I barely see obesity rates, I barely see diabetes, I barely see autoimmune conditions. And it's not that I'm some magical doctor that's doing something so amazing or something like that. It's that they're just health conscious, and they don't come in with those issues nearly as often. And that's what I want to impart on everybody else, is that we have so much ownership over this. It makes a huge difference what you do as a parent. And the vast majority of our health is what you do at home. It's not going to the doctor. I mean, your doctor's not gonna keep you healthy with your 5-minute visits, right? They're there to make sure that you don't have something serious. They're there so you can discuss major issues. They're there to prevent, certain things. If you have an infection, they can give you a medication. But health does not come at the doctor's office. It comes from the decisions that we make, and that's really the future of health. But I don't think most parents think that way.
Mhm.
I think we kind of, assume that everything's okay. They get sick, they go to the doctor, and they don't really realize that what we're doing is what matters most, I think, in terms of our health and wellness.
Mhm. Yeah, it's funny. Joey and I were just chatting yesterday, even in the car, and I was like, we have three like very healthy, robust children, and not to say they don't have their challenges, but like we feel like that's often rare. Right? It's rare to have three kids that don't have a chronic illness, and I was kind of even expressing like I feel a little guilty about that. Like I feel, and he kind of pushed back on me and was like, I don't feel guilty about something that's in our control, and it feels very achievable if it's something you focus on. It's such a tangible. You can reach out and touch it. You can do it if you build up the educational base and you kind of get your spouse on board and you both agree about basic things like food and sleep and home environment and products. And yeah, it took years and years to kind of as our evolution of parents to really figure out what works for our family. But it's hard not to look around and kind of feel like you're the minority when you have healthy kids, and that's really really sad. But also, I think you're right. Part of that switch needs to start with the parents believing it's possible. Even believing that chronic illness can be reversed. I think so often parents are searching for a diagnosis to explain what's going on with their child, and then the conversation maybe stops there. And I think you could extend that and say, hey, even if you do face these things, there are ways to turn things around. There are means that we can utilize maybe outside of the traditional paradigm to get your kid thriving again, thriving in their own way. So I definitely feel that, and I agree with you. I think that's a parenting mindset that we're trying to bust through. And it's hard because you want to like gently encourage parents to be empowered and take their own stand without them, pushing back like I'm already so stressed. So,
Right. I mean, can I speak to that? Because I think
yeah.
that's such a great point. I think that there's a balance there, which is very frustrating to me because I feel like we are moving to a direction where we're kind of pushing in the media and what you're hearing about kind of chronic disease and disease is like, oh, it's just genetics. That's just how it is. It's just medicine. And we don't take the ownership over it. And I think that's because of not wanting to shame parents or make parents feel like they, did something that caused their kids diagnosis or disease. But that's not the point of health and wellness and medicine. The point is not to shame anybody, to say, well, we're here. What can we do to get your kid to the healthiest place? Maybe you didn't know something before, but you know something now, so we can make a difference. Maybe there is something that we can do to get rid of that diagnosis, improve that diagnosis, decrease the medication that you're on, get you off the medication, whatever it is to get your kid in the most healthy or resilient place. That's what we should be doing. But it seems like we're kind of pushing a lot of these diagnoses off and just saying like, oh, it's just the way that it is, which is not true. And there's no question there are some diseases that are genetic, and no matter what you do, you could be the healthiest person in the world, you could live in the middle of nowhere, you could have your own farm, you could still get a genetic condition, your kid could still have that and get sick. And you can also live the most unhealthy life and be smoking every day and drinking every day and still live to 110. Like, these things happen, but that's not the norm. The norm is the more healthful life that you live, the more resilient you make your family, the better your health and wellness will be. And the message, I think, needs to be exactly what you said, that we have some ownership. We can do something about this. You're not your diagnosis. You're not your autoimmune condition that you're going to have for life. There are things that we can do to maybe get rid of it, to maybe turn around. And we see it. We see in integrative medicine that individuals who get a diagnosis of autism, sometimes they'll lose it. Sometimes an autoimmune condition they'll have, and like a thyroid condition, and they'll change up their diet, they'll exercise more, and they'll lose that condition. I mean, diabetes is the perfect example of this. And we know it in diabetes, but we think that like woo-woo and everything else. You have diabetes where you improve your diet, you exercise more, and you lose your diagnosis and your body gets back to a place of balance. And yet there's also an autoimmune diabetes, right? Where it doesn't matter what you do, you can still be healthier, but you're still going to have diabetes no matter what you do. So I think that's true of most conditions, where for some people it's very genetic and there's only so much that you can do, versus the vast majority are actually to do with lifestyle, and there is a ton that we can do, because if we change those modifiable lifestyle factors, then we actually will see those diagnoses go away or vastly improve. And as an integrative doctor, I see it all the time, and as does every other integrative doctor that I've ever spoken to. And so I think we just need to start breaking things down and not saying that it's just genetic. I think we can understand there's a genetic component to most things, but let's do everything that we can to assume that it's not just genetics, and let's try to give that child, or the parent or whoever, the best chance to be healthy by giving the power back to you to say, well, what can we do to be healthier? Let's do as much as we can. And if we do that, then maybe we're going to get rid of it, maybe we're going to make it better, maybe we're going to decrease the medication, but let's try.
Yeah. Do you get any pushback? Because even saying like your autism diagnoses can change, do you get any pushback on that? People saying,
Yeah.
well, no, that's not true. And what's your response to that?
Most definitely. So as soon as you talk about autism is even a condition or a diagnosis, you get a lot of pushback. But there are, just like with any condition, there are multiple different forms and multiple different reasons for a child to get an autism diagnosis. But again, you look at the statistics. It was like 1 in 10,000, then 1 in 250, then 1 in 150, then 1 in 40, now 1 in 36. In California, it's 1 in 22. I mean, those numbers are so staggering, and they've increased so much over the last few decades that you cannot say that it's genetics. People always want to say, oh, we're better at diagnosis. Oh, it's more genetics. Sure, those are both true. I mean, no question, we're much better at diagnosing, and that's a good thing. But the numbers are not rising at that rate because of genetics or because of diagnosis. Because we're seeing it more. Most of these things you barely saw when we were younger. And 30-40% of kids that have an autism diagnosis are nonverbal, are injuring themselves, or harming themselves. Those are not kids that you would miss 50 years ago. So yes, we're certainly better at diagnosing it, but it's happening more. And there again, this seems to be this almost culture war of like, oh, it's just something that is just normal on the range, which it can be for some people. Some individuals with autism are extraordinarily intelligent, much more so than the average individual. So it's such a wide range. Autism's a blanket diagnosis for probably many things, but the practitioners that work with children who get the diagnosis of autism, if they work from an integrative perspective, you see kids who get the diagnosis who 4 or 5 years later lose the diagnosis and are functioning as somebody who would be considered neurotypical, right? And so to me, that is the strongest evidence that for some kids, that it's not a genetic condition, it's an environmental condition, because you change up their food, change up their lifestyle, you make sure they're getting the right nutrients that they need, and for them, that helps them to function at the most optimal level. So yes, there are multiple different versions of what I think is of autism, and I think that there's so much that we can do, and we shouldn't just necessarily accept it. It's not, again, to shame anybody who has a diagnosis. It's to say that if you as a parent are having difficulties, or your child is having serious difficulties, well, maybe there are some things we can do to make their life more optimal. Not to shame you for a condition, just to say, well, let's do whatever we can to make that child's life as optimal as possible, with a diagnosis or with not. I mean, that doesn't matter to me as a practitioner. What I care about is your child is healthy, they're functioning to their fullest potential, and that we're living the best life that we can. And diagnosis or not, I mean, that doesn't matter to me so much as it is that we are helping you to function at your most optimally. And just to say that it's just genetics, that doesn't do it. It takes ownership away from the rest of us. And with the numbers and how things are going, I mean, yes, some parents are totally happy, and their kids are extraordinarily functional with the diagnosis, but many are not. Many are, in my office, they're crying, their kids are having a lot of difficulties, they're injuring themselves, and for those families, it's not, those are not the families that are saying, oh, this is just neuro part of the spectrum. It's like, this is really difficult for me, what can we do to try to help our child function? They seem like they're in pain, they're having gut issues, all so many different symptoms. And so I think our role should be to help get that kid to the best place, no matter what you want to call it.
Yeah, and it's my understanding that autism is not a genetic disease. Is that correct? There is no gene that can cause it?
So it's a very good question, which I don't think we have an exact answer to. I mean,
Okay.
the most recent research and data that I have seen showing that there are some genetic components to it. If you have twins and family studies, that they're more likely within families, and there are some genes that are starting to show that it's more likely or make it more possible to get the diagnosis, I guess. So it's definitely not fully genetic. Like there's some things like cystic fibrosis where you have the genes and then you have
Right.
the diagnosis. It's a mixture, but that's true of most things. I think probably with autism, like many of the, let's say, other autoimmune conditions, there's a genetic component that makes you more susceptible, and then your life and your lifestyle is kind of the trigger to kind of push you over the edge. So for some individuals, they might be very susceptible no matter what you do. You're going to have symptom X, Y, or Z. And then for other individuals, it just depends on your lifestyle. And again, going back to diabetes, it's just the easiest example to understand, where for many people they can eat whatever they want, they don't get diabetes. But for some people, they don't eat the healthiest, and that pushes them over the edge to get diabetes. And so that's the way that I think of most of these conditions, is that there's a genetic component, and then we and our lifestyle kind of push us over. But what we're doing these days pushes a lot of people over.
Yeah. And faster too. And that's where the conversation of epigenetics and our ability to influence our gene expression through lifestyle choices comes in, which we've talked about on the show before, which to me is very hope giving. The fact that we can have an influence in how our genes are expressed and in a positive way. I think that's really encouraging. Do you think, as a pediatrician, I'm so interested, are we normalizing some childhood behavior that wouldn't have been typical maybe 50 years ago? Or to ask another way, is this sliding spectrum of what is to be expected of kids changing and maybe going down because our population of kids is so sick?
I think so. I that is one of the biggest concerns to me. I think that's like the overarching question you're asking there in terms of what we just talked about, is we're normalizing disease. We're normalizing unhealthy lifestyles. We're normalizing obesity, diabetes, autism. We're normalizing a lot of things that were never considered normal 50 to 100 years ago. Developmental milestones, all sorts of things that are issues. It's like we're taking the responsibility off of kids. We're taking the responsibility off of parents, and I think that's a mistake. I think we need to say we want our kids to be healthy. This is not okay. And what are we going to do to change this? It's not to shame any parents. It's not to shame anybody. It's to say, I want my kids to be healthy. I don't want to have two kids and have one with a chronic disease. I want to have zero chronic diseases in my family. What can I do to give my kids the best chance? That doesn't mean that they won't have one, but I want to minimize that risk as much as possible. And as a society, we should be valuing health, because obviously it's very important. You want your kids to be healthy. You don't want them to be on a medication for the rest of their life. And so we need to figure out what are the big triggers and what can we do from a societal level, and then what can we do from a family level. But in the short term, you can't change society, you can't change the air, right? So you have to decide, okay, well, what can I do? Well, you can change the air in your home, right? You can buy more plants. You could buy furniture that is the best possible furniture that you can have, that doesn't have a lot of chemicals sprayed on it. You can buy things without flame retardants. You can use vinegar and water and baking soda instead of chemical cleaners. Like, there are things that you can do to improve, little things for yourself. And hopefully, as a society, we start pushing back and we start saying, well, this is not acceptable. Okay, what are we going to do differently to make sure that our kids are healthy? Hopefully that'll happen. I hope doctors will band together. I hope we'll do this over time, but it just doesn't seem like that's happening at the moment. But most things start with parents, right? It starts with families, and I think if people start to push back, and it does seem that's happening a little bit, then maybe we'll move in a different direction. But right now we're kind of run by big corporations, and they're not going to worry about our health so much.
Yeah, I think the parents in this community specifically are really on fire for a lot of the things you're talking about. They do feel that ownership, and it's that delicate balance of, you've said it multiple times, like, we're not trying to shame anyone. And it's like, why is that even a piece of the conversation? Well, when you do anything that's a little bit against the grain, or when you step out and exert extra effort because you want a different outcome than the standard. I think we can all agree American children are not the epitome of health. So if you want to exert extra effort to get something that's above average, it immediately, anyone who's not doing that can have the sense of like, oh, well, what should I do? You know, like they're doing this extra thing, and no one's ever talked to me about that. And then we go internal, and we start to like wonder, and it's very easy for us to feel shame in that moment. But I think instead the folks in this community are super empowered to do that, because a lot of us have had kids with diagnoses. A lot of us have had health complications, either for ourselves or for our kids, that we've been able to overcome by changing our lifestyle. And if we're not there yet, we're at least listening to shows like this that are trying to push us over the edge to really take on that accountability and that responsibility. And you're totally right. It starts with parents. I'm not going to wait for the government to tell me that, glyphosate is bad, because they never will. They never will. But I can make decisions for my family through education to do things. And so I really enjoy that. I would love to kind of get into your kind of takes on some things, if you're okay. It's kind of like a rapid fire situation, but I just love picking the brains of practitioners who are like-minded. So I would love your take on, this is kind of out there, but it's relevant to me because I'm currently pregnant, and you have it mentioned in your book, I believe, but placenta encapsulation. What is that about? What are the benefits? Is it good? Is it bad? What's your take on it?
Yeah, good question. So I did some research on this for the book, and it's interesting because it's more of a modern phenomenon, placenta encapsulation, in terms of taking your placenta after you give birth and then freeze drying it and then eating it later in pill form. So that's kind of the modern trend. It definitely is trendy. A bunch of celebrities kind of did it and made it cooler, I think, in terms of doing it. And the theory was that it might help you with your mental health. It might help decrease your postpartum depression. It might help on a range of symptoms. Really very minimal research has shown any actual benefit from this. People swear by it. Is there a lot of harm to it? Probably not. The theory really comes from other animal models where animals might eat their placenta after giving birth. But the reality is that they usually eat it raw right after birth versus freeze drying it and eating it later. So probably there's no major benefits from it. But if it's something that you want to do, if it helped you before, I don't think there's any big downside to doing it. I just think if you're gonna spend money on something, there isn't great evidence for it. So I think it's fine to do it if you want to. But if people ask me if they should do it, I don't say that you should do it. I say you could do it if you want to. I mean, maybe we need to study eating like raw placentas. I don't know, but I'm not sure that anybody's going to actually do that. But I think that
they do it. They do it.
Do they? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So our situation, I'm going to be really vulnerable with our audience here. So my midwife, I had a home birth in 2020 because the hospitals were crazy. And my midwife was like, you can do placenta encapsulation. It's a trendy thing. She said the same thing you said. Not a lot of research on it. Women swear by it. Or you can cut it up, freeze it, and throw it in a smoothie. And I thought, well, I'm trying to be really economical. I'll just freeze it and throw it in a smoothie. And Joey, bless his heart, did this for me. And I will tell you that the days I had a smoothie with even like an ounce or two of that in it, I actually felt worse. I felt like my hormonal and emotional response was worse. And so I eventually stopped taking it, threw it away. And then I heard, I think it was the Wellness Mama. There's another prominent blogger who actually did an article about how it can work amazing for some women, and for some women, and sometimes it kind of has the opposite effect. And so I think that's interesting to hear. Yes, it's very trendy, and yes, it sounds like a really good thing, and like we're all about, whole real supplements and what's more, real than your own organ. But at the same time, I think there might be maybe a downside. I don't know. Like you said, we don't really have any data to back
and
that
our
up.
data is definitely not scientific.
Mine was not scientific.
Data of one, yeah.
Yeah,
let's be clear. Let's be clear.
Yeah,
just saying.
I agree, and I think that a lot of it comes from the fact that birth has become so dehumanizing. It's really moved to a much more medical process, right? I mean, the hospital can be really tough on a lot of families, and you're not thinking about really the parent or the kid so much as like, how do we get this done in the medical way. And so I think with a natural kind of backlash, that was something that kind of came out of that. It's like, this is something natural we could do. This is something that other animals do, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's safe or effective or good for you. Maybe, I don't know. I just don't think that we have great data on it. But I think that it's really interesting, and I mean, I think it would be really interesting to do some studies on actually eating it raw and seeing how that goes for people. But just like anything else, just because something natural doesn't make it good, but just because something's medical also doesn't make it good. So there's a wide range of what can be good for you, and that's where it comes back to even the basic premise of the book, like doing what's right for you and your family, right? At the end of the day, it's like, well, you could say like, oh, this is great, I'm going to eat placenta raw, but if it doesn't make you feel good, then that's not good for you. So maybe there's something else we do.
Yeah, I love that, personalizing to your own family. My next question for you is, a big pain point for parents is sleep, right? Especially early on. And there's this whole debate like sleep training versus completely like not sleep training. And how do you encourage healthy sleep, or how do you talk to parents about healthy sleep and establishing healthy sleep rhythms early on for babies? And then even I know a lot of 2 and 3-year-olds who are still struggling to get rest every night. So what does that conversation look like?
Yeah, sleep training and sleep is one of the hot topics, I would say, in parenting, just because people are so adamant on either side
Yes.
of the spectrum, and there are so many people that feel so strongly that you shouldn't sleep train a kid, and it's really mean, and all these things. All I can say as a pediatrician is I've never once seen a parent who did sleep training that came back and is upset that they did it. It's always like, why didn't I do it months ago? We teach kids almost everything, and so teaching them to go back to sleep and to learn how to sleep on their own is just another skill. Do you have to do it? No. Do kids learn to sleep? Certainly most of them will over time. But just like you said, for some kids, we have them come into our bed and we don't teach them to go back to sleep themselves, and we allow them to do that. Then they're going to keep doing that for years. Sometimes, even kids in my practice, they could be 2, 3, 4, and they're still coming into bed every night. They're still waking up multiple times. And as long as you're sleeping through the night overall and you're getting the hours that you need, even if you're waking up, there's nothing medically problematic about that. It's more just personal choice. I feel like sleeping through the night is like a Western thing. I think that's like, we both parents and a lot of families go to work. They have to do things during the day. So waking up multiple times a night is not ideal for parents. And so teaching them to sleep and sleep through the night is really helpful for us. And that's like most skills. Most kids aren't going to go to the bathroom in a toilet unless you teach them that, right? They're just going to go wherever, but that's what we do in modern society. So I think that's the same thing with sleep, is that we kind of learn to sleep through the night. That's what we want. And so we can teach our kids to do that if we want to. It doesn't have to be mean or, leave them in a room all night and cry all night. It doesn't have to be that way. There are lots of ways to do it gently and kind of be there and help them go back to sleep. But to me, at the end of the day, when people ask me, I say it's up to you. There are so many things that there are multiple ways to do it, and that, again, like with this section in the book and many sections, I try to talk about the different options, talk about the evidence, and then kind of come in the middle and let people make the decision that's best for them. Because at the end of the day, there's no right answer here. There's sleep training versus not sleep training. If it stresses you out, if it makes you miserable, if you feel like you're going to be the worst parent for doing it, don't do it. And then maybe a couple of months later, you're going to be like, all right, I haven't slept in 9 months. I'm ready to do it. And then 2 days later, they're sleeping through the night. Other people say to me, oh, it's not possible. You can't sleep train a kid. And I'm like, there are so many families that have come to my office that their kid was waking up 6 times every night. And then they did sleep training for 2 days. And then their kid was sleeping through the night. So yes, you can. There's a whole industry for it. Whether you should or should not, that's up to you, right? There is no right or wrong answer for it. It's just what makes you comfortable. Is a kid gonna, be in the psychiatrist's office in 20 years because you did sleep training? No, they're not. They're going to be upset for 5 minutes and they're going to give you a big hug in the morning. Like, it's not, I don't think it's that big a deal, but people make it a bigger deal than it really needs to be. Just do it if you want to, don't do it if you don't.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think to even have this conversation, you have to define what you're even talking about, because the old school method of like, just let them cry it out and there's no time parameters and you just shut the door and you don't ever address needs. Well, yeah, that's going to be really stressful for the parent and the child.
Mm-hmm.
There are ways to gently encourage comfort in their own space. There are ways to reassure them that you are still there. There are ways to they're not quite awake, but they're kind of unsettled, and you can help them resettle, and then they continue their sleep cycle. And for us, that's something that has worked really well. I kind of call it like a gentle sleep training. It's not a cry it out method. But there is an element where, and usually it's not before 6 months, to be honest. Like the first kind of 6 months of baby's life, you're still learning their rhythm and routine. But when they are able to, people get upset when you're like, you lay them down when they're fed, but, not quite asleep. And it really worked well for us. And I would say that all of our kids have slept through the night starting at 6 months. And not to say there's no kind of sleep regression later on, but there is an element of maybe teaching is the wrong is maybe a triggering word for people, but encouraging positive sleep behavior by being a supportive parent. But that doesn't mean that you pick them up every single time, or that they can only sleep on you, or that their sleep is so restrictive. It's almost like lacking any flexibility in their sleep independently is also not helpful. And so I think the conversation is always like, well, that's so cruel. And it's like, well, there's ways to not do it. And then I've also seen the other side of that spectrum where like parents are held captive. They can't even sleep. Their kids waking up every 45 minutes and they're a year and a half. And you're like, well, is that also beneficial? So I think the conversation I'm probably going to get in a lot of trouble for all the things I just said, but that's okay.
That's okay. You can blame it on me. I started it. I triggered it.
Yeah, I like
you do it anyways to me, so that's fine. I'm used to it. Send them my way. Like complaints, send it to Dr. Joel.
Dr. Joel, just email. Just send him a quick email. We already kind of covered first foods for a baby, but I would love to hear your opinion on hitting milestones. I think as parents, we think of milestones, especially early on, as like rolling over, crawling, walking, talking, having dexterity. Sometimes those milestones get jumbled, and there's different kind of schools of thoughts on how important those milestones actually are versus are we, throwing those out the window in 2024? We don't really know. So what's your take on hitting milestones?
Yeah. If you go to the pediatrician, you're going to usually at most of your visits be talking about milestones, meaning the things that your child is doing in comparison to other kids. And I think having a general framework for what to expect over the next few months is a good thing. I think it's good to know where you kind of generally lie in comparison to other kids. But where we run into a lot of issues with parents and stress is that if your child is not quite doing something at the age where it's average, then it starts becoming very stressful for parents. Like, oh, my child's behind. Is it they have a developmental disorders or something going on? And one of the big things I really try to help parents is really thinking through, okay, how does a doctor think about these things? How should we be thinking about these things? When should you really be worried? And if it's one thing that's not way outside of the normal, that's completely normal and average. Like if for walking or talking, it's at 1, right? That's the average age. But that means that half the kids are not doing it, right? So just because your kid is 13 months old and isn't walking yet, doesn't mean you should be concerned at all. But if they're 18 months, now 2 years, it's getting way farther outside of what would be average. And that's something that's a little bit more concerning. But the bigger picture and the bigger thing that doctors are looking at is all of the different areas together, right? We're much more concerned if you have multiple concerns, you're getting sick all of the time. There are other features that we're worried about, like dysmorphic features or strength issues or whatever it may be. It's multiple things together. That starts to create a picture of something that's a little bit more concerning, like we're not walking, we're not talking, we haven't even really crawled yet, and we're already at 18 months. Like these are the things that we're thinking about, not your kid's 14 months and they haven't said a word yet. It might just be on the lower, the lower end of the average, but they're doing everything else ahead of time. So it's really important to put things into a bigger picture, and it's very easy for developmental milestones or most things these days to kind of Google and get worried about something, where it's important to kind of step back and put things in a bigger picture, because just because your kid has gas doesn't mean they have a stomach diagnosis that's really horrible. Every horrible diagnosis has all those minor symptoms, but most of the minor symptoms are just part of a regular thing or normal baby behavior versus the more scary thing. So Googling can be okay, but at the same time it can be very scary too. So it's just something to be very mindful of as a parent, that you can definitely go down a rabbit hole looking for a diagnosis that most of the time doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. If there's more than one outside the normal range and it's calling concern to other elements and impacting lifestyle, maybe something to have a conversation about. If it's like my child just turned 12 months and they are not walking, probably not something to stress over if that's a singular isolated event. So I hear you. I think that's really good. My final question for you is what about the work kind of that falls outside of traditional pediatrics, things like tongue and lip tie revisions, craniosacral work, myofascial release, chiropractic care? Where do you see these things fitting in as tools for parents?
So as an integrative practitioner, I think, stepping back on that question, to me, the reason why I practice integrative medicine is because I feel like modern medicine goes to medications far too quickly, and there's so many other alternative modalities that have been used for decades and centuries and are used all over the world that we just don't really use in Western society that can be very helpful for some. I think that people think of integrative medicine sometimes as woo-woo, but it doesn't have to be. There certainly are some people that do things that are way out there, but the vast majority, there's a ton of evidence for it. It can be very useful, and you don't need to look down upon modern medicine to do something that's integrative. Like I'm not against Western medicine at all. There's a time and a place to use a medication. Sometimes an antibiotic can save your life. You can go to the emergency room and get an X-ray and MRI, and we have magical, wonderful things that we never had before that can keep you alive, and do those things. But most of the time, you don't need that. Most of the time, there are all sorts of other things that we can do first. Medications have side effects. Natural remedies generally don't, or are much lower risk for some of these things. And in Western society, like, you jump to a medication right away, whereas most of the rest of the world doesn't do that. And an antibiotic has side effects, so I think it's really important to start to learn about some of these other modalities and see where they can fit into your lifestyle and how you can use them to foster health and wellness versus medicine. We're so used to that doctor medicine paradigm that people don't really focus on any of these other things until they're not healthy, like we kind of said at the beginning. So this is a good full circle moment. But there's so many great chiropractors out there. There's so many great craniosacral therapists. There's so many great acupuncturists. There's a lot that can be very helpful for you, especially when it comes to chronic illnesses or things that don't really have a good solution in modern medicine. And acupuncture is probably the best example, right? I mean, this was a fairly woo-woo thing 20, 30 years ago, and then we had an opioid epidemic, and we kind of realized maybe giving everybody an opioid for pain is not the best thing, and so we needed something to replace that. And now almost every hospital first line therapy is acupuncture, right, for pain. And it's not seen as woo woo anymore. It's seen as like, this is a thing we can get covered under insurance, and this is normal, right? Well, all these other things, supplements, herbs. I mean, we think of coffee. It's like coffee is a food, right? But it can affect your brain. Chamomile tea, like, well, that can make you more calm. There are so many things out there that can help you, and it's not a medicine, so it's not like a quick fix. But these things can help your body get back into balance, so that we don't have to do a medication. So yeah, I'm all for the entire list of everything that you said. There are wonderful practitioners in these fields, and there are not the best practitioners, which is the same in medicine. They're great doctors, and they're not so great doctors, but it's time that we work as a team, right? That's really my theory. I don't think it's going to be up to doctors to learn a ton about nutrition and to start doing acupuncture and all these things. Like, no, you don't have to, but we can work together. We can start to work as a team. We all have the same goal, which is healthy kids, right? And there's no reason to have a lot of arrogance. And I think medicine's very arrogant these days, of that, like, this is the best way, this is the only way, when the reality is our health and chronic diseases is worse than ever, in terms of at least that part of medicine. And so we don't necessarily have all the solutions. You're not going to fix those things in 5 or 10 minute visits, but you can send your patient to a nutritionist. You can send your patient to a chiropractor or a naturopath and let them spend 2 hours and work together. Like, you can make sure that they don't need an antibiotic, but a naturopath maybe can spend an hour with you and then figure out, oh, there's mold in your home. Oh, we aren't eating the best. Oh, you aren't exercising. Those aren't conversations that tend to happen in the doctor's office. So it would be nice if it would, but it's probably not necessarily going to happen in the short term. But we can work together. Why not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. Your willingness to lean into other practitioners' expertise is unfortunately kind of rare, but very refreshing. And I think that's important for parents to know that there are practitioners out there who are willing to work together. And they're not going to scold you for looking into maybe a lip and tongue tie source of this digestive issue is maybe due to some structural issues. Anyways, we could do a whole episode on that alone, but we won't. Joey, do you have anything else?
I'm all set, man. Holy smokes.
I love talking to practitioners because we are parents and we just want to have the most accurate information to be able to assess our own kids. I think something that we've hit on multiple times today is parents' ability and power to take their kids' health in their own hands. And having conversations like this is helpful because we do rely on experts and people who have gone through the training, and we don't want to erase that from society. No one is saying that the parent needs to all of a sudden go to med school, but having the responsibility and being the first line of defense is, I think, our role. And so it's helpful to talk to practitioners who echo that and who can support parents in their pursuit of having healthy children and healthy families. So, Dr. Joel, will you let people know where they can find you, where they can find your new book, which is available for pre-order now but releases in August, and ways they can connect?
Yeah, so probably the best place will be on Instagram at Dr. Joel Gator, or you can grab the book anywhere you get books, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever, or you can go to parentingatyourchildspace.com and you can order it from there. And if you do order it from the website, my email's on there. You can message me and I'll send you the first chapter, a bonus chapter, and then a free 1 month to my VIP community for parents, which is a great place to kind of chat, especially if you're naturally minded, and chat with other naturally minded parents, ask questions. You can kind of follow up on anything that you might have read or thought about that you want to discuss further.
That's awesome. And do you have an official release date in August?
August 6th is the release.
August 6th. Okay, awesome. Well, everyone needs to go give you a follow. Your Instagram account is absolutely wonderful, and pre-order your book so that they can have that as soon as it releases. Thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you, Joel. And with that, Dr. Joel Gator has left the virtual chat. I was just trying to do the best I could to not get in the way of you learning as much as you possibly could.
I love that there's some shows where you literally utter 5 words, and then there's other shows where you take the whole interview.
It's just, it was one of those times where I was like, man, I have a lot of interesting thoughts here. And I was like, it will derail this conversation in a horrific way.
Oh, I wanted to hear your interesting thoughts.
No, they were all just like, questions that probably weren't, I think a lot of people know more than I do. So sometimes when I ask questions, it's kind of like, okay, Joey wants to know what sleep training is. Clearly, he's a great parent.
Yeah. I kind of defined it a little bit. I think it's more of that's funny that you say that, because I think more moms have opinions on sleep training and more dads
don't know what you mean when you say sleep training.
I know.
I'm like over here thinking like sleep training. Okay, we want our kids to be able to sleep, right? What does that mean? What are we talking about sleep training?
This is a great point. And I think that's why sometimes you don't see moms and dads on the same page, because I will say moms have a tendency, especially early on, to have sort of an anxious attachment with their child and be like, "Ooh, every little squeak and cry and thing, we got to go." And there's a difference between meeting baby's needs and constantly disrupting a cycle that they are working to establish. And that might be controversial, but I don't know. I think you're tap into your own intuition and see what works for you. But that's funny that you say that, because I think that's the mom that's like, I hold a stand this way or the other, and oftentimes the dad's like, yo,
whatever.
Let's have healthy sleep. You know, whatever age appropriate healthy sleep.
What is sleep training? Yeah.
That is so funny.
So I didn't want to sit there and be like, so tell me, what is sleep training?
No. I'm into it. Well, we kind of covered that, and maybe we do a whole episode on that, honestly, because I think that'd be fascinating. Yeah, I love talking to pediatricians, integrative pediatricians specifically, because it just gives a little window into like, am I crazy? Are the things I'm doing insane? Oh, food matters, sleep matters, chronic illness can be reversed. we can have influence in our home. It's just overarching good reminder for those things. So make sure you go check out his Instagram page is great. He does these little things where he like writes a kind of a zingy phrase on a like whiteboard and holds it up and just like takes a photo. Like that's his thing.
I love it.
And they're really catchy and I actually think they're great. So he's a great account. Go follow him. And yeah, if you like today's podcast episode, be sure to leave a rating and review. Super helpful for me and Joey to hear your feedback. And also those 5-star reviews help push our podcast to the Explore page so other friends can join our community and gain knowledge from our amazing guests. So we really, really appreciate all your feedback.
I love it.
Truly. Yeah, what else?
If you wanted to learn more about food, nutrition, and whatnot, we have resources as well. So go pre-order Dr. Joel's book. Do that first and foremost. And also, you can find our books on our website, homegrowneducation.org. We've got recipe books, we've got curriculum for your kids, all kinds of things to get you into the real food game, to take control, to kind of take some of that ownership back that we were talking about. That's kind of the mission here. So we're trying to provide resources to people to give them more education so that they can have that freedom to make decisions and have ownership of their health and their kids' health. And then we want to change the generational kind of vibes, right? We want to give kids that education early. We want it to just be normalized. And that's what we're working towards. So homegrowneducation.org, we got books on there. Go check those out. We got free resources on there. Go check those out. We've got a products and goods business that we have created to help prevent as much pain and stress as possible when you're at the grocery store buying home goods. Everything from coffee to soap to sourdough tools on our website, shopth.com. Go there, use code homegrown to get 10% off your order. And get yourself some awesome stuff. Get yourself some awesome stuff for your kitchen, for your home, for yourself. Anyways.
Yeah. Love it.
If you want to hear us talk more, because, man, Joey didn't ask the question, what is sleep training? And I want to hear Joey talk more. You can find me on Instagram. I don't really talk a whole lot on there, but I'm there.
You can see him running and drinking coffee and shooting his bow.
I'm at Joey Hazelmeyer. Elizabeth is at Liz Hazelmeyer and at homegrown_education. And until next time, that's a wrap.